Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. This is part two of my interview with school shooting survivor Missy Jenkins-Smith. So, um, so going back to December 2nd of 1997 up until present time, how has this
Uh-huh.
experience of the shooting affected your daily life since back then versus now? Have you made any improvements since then?
There's not been any improvements to my paralysis, no, unfortunately. But what they had to do afterwards is that I spent about 5 months in the hospital at the time. I had to spend time recovering over my lung, the injury to my lung. And so when I finally moved to a rehabilitation floor, I can't remember exactly when that was. I just know that I left that hospital in Paducah at the beginning of February, the following February, and was moved to a hospital called Cardinal Hill, which was more focused on spinal cord injuries. Whenever I was at the on the rehab floor in the hospital in Paducah, it was me and a bunch of elderly people with strokes. So it was like it wasn't centered with just helping me with my spinal cord injury. So after learning some of the basics at the hospital, I learned um, how to dress myself in the hospital in Paducah, which took me 45 minutes the first time to dress myself. I had to learn how to, and I was just putting on sweatpants, by the way. It wasn't anything else that was as challenging. The most challenging thing I've ever put on is pantyhose. That was like, it's like, because you've got to, deal with legs that are working against you. But I also had to learn how to, turn my body and use my arms more than anyone wouldn't use their arms normally. Because I don't have my stomach muscles, because of my injury being so high, I just have my arms. So I have to use that as a way to pull my body back up or to move myself. So I had to build up strength in my arms, and that was something that took some time. Learning how to use a wheelchair was embarrassing because I didn't realize how I didn't really know how to use one. I got into it and I didn't really even know how to turn. I knocked into the wall. I was doing an interview with Dateline and knocked into the wall while I was doing the interview, and I was glad they didn't put that on there. But I was not good at it. But I learned some of those basics, balance also, like sitting on the edge of a bed and trying to balance your body because I didn't have that core stomach balance. I had to use my head to balance. And so once I learned those little basic things, then they moved me to Cardinal Hill in Lexington. And so that was hard. I had to leave Paducah. My family picked up and left with me. They had to get an apartment and rented and stayed there. It was my mom, dad, my twin sister, and my older sister went as well. She had actually had just moved from Lexington because she had left college, and it was kind of a good thing she did leave college because after that, she kind of really helped me, kind of really become like my caretaker in a way. She stopped her life to take care of me because my mom at that point was also going through physical health issues. She had arthritis, osteoporosis, all those kind of things. Right. And she was actually had just gotten to the point where she had to use a wheelchair a lot. And so she couldn't take care of me like I would need. So my older sister stepped up and did that. So she went with us as well. And so I was there learning how to do like transfers on and off the bed, in and out of out of the bathroom, like into the shower, those kind of things, everyday things, until the first week in April. And then I finally got to go home. And I think it was during spring break at that time. So I got to have a week home with my family. But it was really hard in the beginning whenever the shooting happened, because I remember on December the 16th, every victim that was in the hospital had gotten out. The last one, who was Shelly with the hand injury, she got to leave. And I remember crying and wanting to go home too, but I knew that I couldn't. I knew that I was going to have to be there so much longer. But when I eventually got out of the hospital, getting back to my home, I didn't realize how small it was either. It was a small house. It was 3 bedroom, living room, kitchen, one bathroom, and a laundry room. And so that was it was difficult trying to maneuver around that. We also had a ramp that had to be built on front of the house. So thank goodness the people of Paducah donated that, and also eventually donated a wheelchair accessible addition onto my home. So they built an addition onto the back of my our house that had a large living room, kitchen that was accessible for me to use. There was another area where we were able to put a dining table, and then I had a pool table area where I could do that. And then I had my bedroom that was wheelchair accessible with the closet that I could get to, and the bathroom was accessible for me as well with a roll-in shower, and I could roll under the sink. And they also, because me and my twin sister had shared a room together our entire lives, and even though we were getting this extra room, excuse me, even though we were getting this extra room, I still wanted to take her with me because it just wasn't fair for me to have this large, nice room and her be back in the old little room that we had. So they built it where she had her own sink and I had my own. So it was accessible to her as well. And so, that was finished, I guess, my junior year in high school. So I had that. And so things were good. I felt like I had a lot of help from the community and from people all over the world that made things so much easier for me. And I'm so blessed for that. I remember when I was in the hospital and I was upset and scared that I was going to be alone and that people were going to forget me once that everybody was going back to their regular lives and whatever. I felt like no one was going to remember that I was still, trying to live my life and it was still affecting me. But I got letters from people all over the world, people that I didn't know that took their time out to write to me. And that meant so much to me and made me realize that they took the time out for that. Why can't I put effort on myself and live my life? So that helped a lot. I even had letters from foreign countries from people that could barely say anything in English, but I could decipher, I'm praying for you, those kind of things. And so, and then after that, after getting back to home and then having to go back to school where I was different, that was also another concern. So I was like, great, like I'm going to the school, there was a lot of bullying and here I am different than everybody. This is going to be hard, and also how are people going to treat me now versus when they treated me before? And so I also questioned my abilities and what I could do because I had a twin sister who was able to walk and go do these things that I wanted to do as well. And thank goodness that I had wonderful friends and then a sister who really cared about me, who made sure that if it was something that was going to be hard to do, that they did it. If it was something on the football field, I was dragged out there in a field by my friends. If it was, we went to a Halloween party and it was upstairs, up a spiral staircase. They got me up a spiral staircase in my wheelchair. I mean, like, I never felt like there was an obstacle. And I was blessed for that. I also went to a camp. I was invited to a camp where, with other people with spinal cord injuries, where I learned how to water ski, jet ski, ride a horse, climb a tree. I honestly felt at that point that I'd done more in a wheelchair than I'd ever done walking. So I was blessed for that. And then later on, I ended up my senior year going to Los Angeles and learning how to use a brace that allowed me to walk across the stage for graduation. And I was able to use it to stand up at my senior prom, which was so much better than my junior prom because at the time my date, he was like in the floor, he was on my lap. I honestly didn't know what to do with him because when you're in a wheelchair and dancing, I mean, that's difficult. But I was able to stand up and dance with my date. And then I used it, like I said, across the stage for graduation. In the month of March, my senior year, I went back to the hospital. I actually spent from August to November learning how to use the brace, living in Los Angeles, which I was totally fine with because that was LA my senior year. And so I kind of did like a kind of what most people had to do in COVID, whenever, to learn how to, like, with school. It was kind of the similar thing, but as best as we could do in 99 and 2000. So it was mostly emailed assignments. So I still went to Heath, but that way. And so during March, I got to go learn more advanced skills with it, but also walked a quarter of a mile in the Los Angeles Marathon. And then I used the brace later on to stand up and say my vows to my husband at our wedding. So lots of things like that I was very blessed with. I had Me and my husband got married June 24th of 2006. So we just had our 18th anniversary. We have two children. Our oldest is Logan, who is 16, and he was born September the 3rd of '07. And he was actually born on Labor Day. So I got to go in labor on Labor Day. And then my second, he's 14, and his name is Carter, and he was born April the 13th of 2010. And so I have two boys, and now that they're older, the frustrating part that now that I'm older, they're older, I am going through a lot of physical health issues now because of my arms. I had to leave my full-time job as a counselor that I worked at a school, and that counseling job I loved. I thought I was going to be there until I had to retire. But because of the overuse of my arms, I wasn't able to do the everyday thing that I would have to do that would be required for that job. There are some days when I wake up, my body doesn't want to work with me. And so I had a torn tendon in my right shoulder. That was the first injury I had in 2017. I ended up leaving the job in June of 2019, right before all the COVID stuff happened. But after that, I ended up having a torn rotator cuff in my left shoulder. I never was able to fix the torn tendon because every doctor I would see told me there was nothing they could do for me because of the overuse of my shoulders. So I still live with that injury. The rotator cuff, I didn't even go see about for a year because I thought I was going to get told the same thing. And when that injury happened, I couldn't do anything. My husband had to dress me, help me set up. Like I couldn't do anything. And it was terrible. It was very, very like it was depressing. And then I started running into like issues with severe carpal tunnel. I have that. And then I also have a dying bone in my right wrist. And it is the most painful thing, but there's nothing that can be done for it because it would require surgery to have a bone removed. And then they would have to fuse my wrist. And I have to use that. So there's been a lot of challenges now that I've gotten older. And I thought that I would be old and gray when I started having these problems. But it makes sense after 26 years of using your arms are not made to do that. And so I'm running into these problems, but I'm okay. I've learned that I have to deal with the frustration and the stress of it, and I have to let that out. I can't keep it inside, but I also have to remind myself of the positives that are in my life. And that's how I get through it. And I wrote a book called I Choose to Be Happy, and it is a choice. I have to make that choice every day because I still have my kids who, keep me going and that I love and that I want to live life for, and not just stay in a bed for the rest of my life. And there was times in the past where I was just like, whenever I was 15 and learning how to dress myself again, and all of it was hard and I didn't want to do it. I was ready to live my life in the bed because it was too hard. And so I remember pushing through it then. And I knew even though I was like 40 at this point with all these problems, I could push through it now. It was going to be a little bit more challenging. But I did end up, my first thing I had was rotator cuff surgery, the first thing that I did. And that I did not realize was going to be as rough as it was. After the surgery, I had to lay in a bed for 5 months I was only able to use my right arm. And then after that, I had to learn how to do everything over again. I had to learn how to dress myself, sit up again. I didn't realize I was going to start at the beginning, and I wanted to scream over that, but I got through it and I made it through, dealing with the frustrations, but reminding myself of the positives I had. And so after that, after recovering, that following November of 2022, I fell out of my wheelchair while subbing. I was outside going down a steep ramp, and I fell out of my chair because I have zero balance. There's nothing to grab onto, and I fell on parking lot pavement, which is hard. But I broke my left femur, and I because of osteoporosis. I've fallen many times, but that time it got me. So I had to have surgery for that, and I have plates and screws in my left thigh bone, the femur. And then when I was almost over that, March of 2023, not March, May of 2023, I fell out of my wheelchair again, just trying to change my cat's water bowl. I was bent over and I kind of like didn't have the balance. I wasn't doing it correctly. I shouldn't have been leaning forward. I should have been leaning to the side. And so my foot fell off my caught on my foot plate and it broke my left fibia and tibia. So then I had to have surgery on that. And then I was in the hospital over that. The positive in that injury, though, was that I was in the bathroom at the time and the toilet was right in front of me. So I could have fell in the toilet, but I didn't. So that was my positive. But then after I got over that injury in August of 2023, I found out I had a blood clot in my right leg and I was experiencing stroke symptoms. It was so scary. But because of the surgeries and because of being in a wheelchair, I'm more susceptible to blood clots in the first place. But then with surgeries, and I also have a family history because of my mom, I ended up having that. So now I deal with that, but it's manageable and I'm okay. So far, I've heard things come in threes. So I'm hoping the femur, the fibia tibia, and my blood clot is it for a while. But like I said, I have challenges, but I have to remind myself that I'll be okay. And I think the most frustrating part is that in September of 2022, Michael had his parole hearing because his sentence was 25 years to life. And so once the parole hearing happened and we found out the result that he would have to stay in prison for the rest of his life, most people felt like, which I've always said, there's no such thing as closure, because this is something that I will remember for the rest of my life, but also physically it will remind me. But I guess I kind of felt like that was going to be a closure in a way, but after falling and dealing with the injuries, I knew that that was something that was still going to follow me for the rest of my life, but I wasn't going to let it beat me. But it's still frustrating to know that, yes, he's dealing with the consequences of his actions, but I'm still going to be dealing with the consequences of his actions too, which it's okay. I've got, I've made a purpose for this. And I think that's what gets me through it every day, is that there's a reason. And so I'm a public speaker now, and I hope that what I say helps others. And so for that, what I have to deal with when it comes to wheelchair and giving it a purpose helps a lot.
So, and you just answered one of my questions, which was how do you feel about the 2022
Yeah.
results of Michael Carneal? So, with that being said, him never getting a chance to ever get out of prison, have you ever had a chance to speak with him after the crimes? And two, how do you feel about him never getting out? Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think that he deserves a chance?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did actually to kind of start in the beginning. When he was sentenced in December of 98, year after everything happened, everyone who was a victim or a family member of a victim could get up and speak to him. He wasn't allowed to speak to anybody, but everyone was able to talk, and he would mostly like just stare at the table and not look at anybody. And so when it was my turn, again, I'm not a confrontational person. I also knew him before this. And so I knew also that yelling at somebody and anger is not going to get someone to listen. And I'm not an angry, like I'm not a person to yell either, So I wanted him to hear me, and I knew he would hear me if I talked to him like I'm talking to you. So first thing I said was, Michael, you can look at me if you want to, because I did want him to see that I was different than when he had seen me before, because he knew me. And so he looked at me, and I told him some of the things that had changed in my life because of the injury and the frustrations at that point. And that, but then I told him that I was going to make it through. I was going to be okay. And that I had forgiven him for what he had done to me. And the reason why I forgave him, I didn't explain it to him, but it was for me. It was not for him. It was so that I could move on with my life, because I felt like I had zero control of that day. I didn't know it was going to happen. And if I did, I wish I would have done, I would have done something. I would hope I would have told or something. But I felt like I didn't have control of that day, but I have control of every day after that. And I wasn't going to let that be the consequences of my actions to make me an angry person, because being angry is exhausting to me, and I would rather be happy. And so I felt happier if I was able to say, I forgive you and I'm going to move on with my life, even though there's frustrations. And I don't want to yell, I hate Michael or those kind of things. I don't want that in my life, hate in my life, that kind of stuff. But after I spoke to him at that, I was probably probably the only nicest speaker that came across to him. And so after that, my senior year, he actually started writing me letters. And the letters were very odd. Like, some of them were personal, like, "Hey, Missy, what's up?" And then there were some that was like, because my real name is Melissa, and he'd be like, "Missy, or do I have the right to call you Missy? Should I call you Melissa?" And it was very, like, I don't know, very different. Like, he was scared to talk to me. But then others, it was like we were in school together and hanging out or something. It was weird. And so after that, while I was in California learning how to walk, was when I was getting these letters. And then whenever I finally got home in November, we checked our answering machine, because it was the first time we checked it once we got home. And this, again, landlines and all that kind of stuff were still around. And there was a voicemail from him. And he said, "Hey, Missy, I just called to see what you're up to. My number is whatever, and you can give me a call back, and so will connect you to me." And I was just like, I didn't know that somebody who attempted to murder you could call you and talk. And so I think that he was trying to use me as like a counseling tool in a way. And that at that point, I was taking care of myself. I was trying to make my life better, with the whole brace thing, and trying to beat, make it out of high school and graduate and walk across the stage for graduation. I was focused on me. And so what topped it off was, I guess, in January, we got another phone call, except I wasn't at home. I was at a basketball game, and my dad answered the phone. And when he answered, Michael was like, "Hey, is Missy there?" And my dad was like, "No, she's at a game. Can I ask who's calling?" And so then he got quiet, and he said, "Michael." And then my dad got quiet, because then he knew who it was at that point. I didn't have a Michael calling me all the time. And so once my dad didn't say anything, I was just like in shock. Michael said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," like over and over again. And then my dad just hung up the phone. And then we went to the lawyers and said, "Can you please ask him to stop contacting?" At that point. So we stopped. But then after I got married, I met a man who wanted to write a book with me. He wanted to help me write a book. And so one of the things he wanted to do, he asked me if I was asked at a speaking engagement by a kid. A question was, and it was in the Associated Press, that actually helped me get the co-author. Was the kid asked me, would I ever be willing to meet with him in person and talk to him? And at that point, I was like, I think I would be ready to talk to him if I had that opportunity. So the Associated Press put that in the paper, and that's how my co-author found me. He worked for the Cincinnati Enquirer, and so he contacted me. And so one of the things while we were working on the book together, he said, "Do you want me to see if I could try to get you guys together to meet?" And I said, "Yeah, that would be great," because that was something that I hadn't, I didn't know where to start when it comes to something like that. And it would always have been me wondering if I could, but never do anything about it. So he got it set up, and there was a lot of hoops and things to jump through, but Michael was willing to meet with me. And so it was July of 2007. And so I was pretty much like about to pop with my first child, because September 3rd is when I had him. So I was like way into my pregnancy. And I got to the penitentiary, which is LaGrange Penitentiary. And that place is so scary looking on the outside. And I then started having second thoughts. I started kind of getting worried, and I was like, I'm so stressed out. I'm going to have my baby in this parking lot, because I was just like, worried about it. Well, at that point, I knew that this was going to be possibly the only opportunity that I may have to talk to him face to face, because of where we had gotten to that point and how long it took for us to get where we were. And so I had my twin sister there with me, Mandy, as support. And then he had his older sister with him as well. And we had a mediator that met with us too, which we didn't even use her. She just sat there, and I knew I wouldn't have to use her. But before I went in there, they told me that he was on medication and that he'd actually been doing the best that he'd ever done, had ever been doing, and on this medicine, but said that even though he's doing well, he may have to take breaks while talking with me, mentally because of the situation. And I said, sure, I understand. Well, once I got in there and saw him, it was so weird because I felt like I was meeting with two different people. The person I knew from high school, and he definitely didn't look different. He'd grown up. Like the person I remember from high school, I could still see him in there, but he was tiny and kind of like someone would say like he was just like frail and I guess geeky looking, but I never thought that of him. But now he was huge, 6 foot something, 200 and something pounds, and like big. And so it was like the person that I knew and from high school, and then I knew it was the person that had attempted to murder me and created what had happened. And so I talked to him for about 2.5 hours, and I knew I was not going to get a reason why out of him. I knew that was not going to be what I was going to get. But what I wanted from him was to know if he was willing, or if he could have gone back and made a different decision, would he have done it? Sorry, my cat's back. Yes, yeah. Down, just go. I wanted to know only one thing, and I was hoping to get an answer for this, is that if he could go back, would he have made the same decision? And I asked him that question, and he said he wished he could have changed it. He wouldn't have ever done what he had done. And so for me, that's what I needed, because I did a lot of speaking at that time, still do, but I wanted that message from him because I felt like that message would be very powerful for another kid to hear if it was somebody was contemplating on thinking that was going to be the same thing to help their problems, because it definitely didn't help his. And so we did share, I did share with him everything I saw that morning in detail because I wanted him to know, and I wanted to know what he remembered. And then we just talked about high school and how things were or whatever. But at the end of it, the 2.5 hour conversation, he didn't have to have any kind of breaks, but he told me that he was sorry for what he had done. And so I felt like it was a good meeting. After that is when because I did ask him if bullying was one of the reasons why he did what he did. He told me it was, but then he started talking about his mental illness, which I have no doubt that he has a mental illness. I know that anyone who makes that decision or does something like that has to be going through something mentally. But I could tell he was starting to really lean on that. And so that's when, after that, he started trying to, I guess, change his plea that he had, because he pled guilty but mentally ill, but started trying to change it to not guilty for reason of insanity. And he went to court, I don't even know how many times. It was over 5, less than 10, trying to change his plea, which never happened. The judge every time said no, that he was, at that time they said there was too much time that had passed, and that there was no way to tell if he was mentally sound then versus now. It was just too long. So after he exhausted all the things, every chance he could for that, then the next time any kind of court stuff would happen would have been the parole date. And so it was hard though, after, like, I wasn't looking for apology, but then I found out after he started doing the appeals for his sentence, I found out that he had been on serial killer websites, something called Murderbilia, where people that own these websites would sell things from criminals, those that are serial killers or considered serial killers. And I don't know really the definition of a serial killer, but I guess because he killed 3 people, he was considered that. I don't know. But there were people that sold like his prison number, letters that he'd written, a hand tracing. There currently still is pictures of him. There was one that says Red Rum across which I saw all that during the parole hearing. I went back to look and to see if all of that was still up. But one of the things that I guess when I looked at that, the one thing that bothered me the most back whenever I first found it was that there was like a question answer. It was almost like a dating service in a way, like an interview with Michael. And one of the questions was like, "What do you see in a girl?" That kind of thing. Like, what are you looking for in a girlfriend or something? And that kind of made me sick because I'm like, why are you okay with being considered a serial killer? That bothered me. If you're so sorry, even though I'm not looking for an apology, I'm like, that to me kind of felt like he could possibly be involved in something like this again, if that makes any sense. He didn't seem to, that didn't bother him. And even though he didn't make money off of that, supposedly the people who own the websites made the money, there was still someone profiting off of what he did. And so to me, that didn't feel comfortable with me. So as time went on, I didn't talk to him or see anything from him anymore. I think the last time I saw him, didn't speak to him, was at one of the appeals, one of the hearings. It was one in Paducah. All the other appeals he was not at, but that one particular one he was. And that one appeal was kind of interesting because they also had brought up the serial killer website, but also had found that he was checking out books out of the library about mental illnesses, which to me, that was, some people looked at it as in he was like studying up on his mental illness and how to create it, you know what I mean? That kind of thing to make it more believable. But I know that his mother's side of the family has had mental illness in it. I truly believe the bullying kind of helped push that. And because most kids aren't diagnosed with some sort of schizophrenia, which is what he was diagnosed with, until after the age of 18. And so I think that just kind of pushed it forward some. So I do believe he has a mental illness, but I think that, he still knew right from wrong. And he knew that bringing a gun to school would hurt somebody or kill somebody. But once the parole hearing came, I was concerned that if they did let him out, what might happen, because at that point things were still on that website being sold and more up-to-date things. So if he didn't want those things on there, if that was not something that wasn't in his control, I would think he would be able to do something. His dad was a lawyer. He has a lawyer himself. I couldn't see why that there wouldn't have been some sort of action to try to have that removed. You know what I mean? So for me, I feel like there was still like, he didn't care being called a serial killer. That was okay with him. And so for someone to get parole and being okay called that bothered me. I knew that he was on medication, and they said there was 3 different ones that they had mentioned in 2007. And at this point, when they started talking about his medications, he was on like five or something like that. So obviously, as he got older, they had to adjust medications and change things. And so I knew at that point, he's been taken care of since he was 14. At that point, I think he was like 39 or 40. And so from the age of, I guess now this past June the 1st, that was his birthday, he turned 41. And so he's been in the system since he was 14 years old. He's been given medication by somebody. He's seen counselors. He's been taken care of. And the thought of him getting out and to take care of himself at that point, to me, did not sound like it was something he'd be capable of. Also, the plan was for him to go live with his parents. And at that point, his parents are elderly now. He would still be living in Kentucky. I think it was like central Kentucky. And his parents are elderly at this point. They weren't able to help him then at the age of 41, and then being older. I couldn't see them having the ability to make sure he took his medicine, or make him take his medicine, or go to his counseling appointments. I could see where the stress of the world would cause him to give up, or to make him feel like he was defeated, because at the time of 14 years old back in 97, the world was not very forgiving or nice to him then. I couldn't imagine him being a convicted murderer, that they would be nice to him now, knowing who he was. He living in Kentucky still and trying to get a job. I could see where he might do the same thing again, go off his meds, parents can't help him, and then for him to do that again. I could see that happening. And so then also, not only that, he did have a parole officer, but he didn't have any kind of ankle monitor or anything like that. That was not anything that was going to be given to him. So if he showed up, he'd have a set of rules. The rules would be probably not to contact his victims or to go visit them, but I could see him coming to visit me. Now that the internet's so much more improved, I can see he could probably figure that out, even though the world in 97 is so much different than the world is now. I think that would also be something he would be struggling with as well, how the world's changed. But I think he could probably end up finding where I lived very easily. And it's not that I was concerned about it, but the fact that my boys were like, he could find where we lived and he could sit in our driveway, or he could, that's bothered him. And I asked, I think the victim advocate at the time, I was just like, well, what if that were to happen? What would I do? And they said, oh, well, you call his parole officer. And I was like, the guy in central Kentucky, like, and I live in Western. I was like, he's not even here, like that kind of thing was very uneasy because I was worried how uneasy my kids felt. I didn't think he would attack me or try to get me or something, but they were scared. And that's what upset me, that they would feel, it was affecting them kind of thing. And so that didn't settle well with me. And so those are the things I was worried about. But once the parole hearing came, there was a day where the victims were able to share their statements. And I had written, because we had to write a statement out, and I wrote a 25-page statement about how it affected my life from then until now. So 25 pages. And I hope the parole board read it. They said they did. But whenever I had whenever I spoke, and you could choose to be public or private in your presentation to the parole board. There was only 2 of the members of the parole board that met with us, but I chose to be public. I knew the parole hearing was going to come. 25 years seemed so long from when it happened, but once it was already there, I was there. And it was a stressful situation because I wanted to make sure that the parole board saw me in my wheelchair, because I felt like I was a reminder of what happened that morning, because the girls, the parole board didn't know them and they wouldn't be there. And yes, the family would be there, but they wouldn't know that they lost them. They couldn't visually see that. There were scars from the victims that, like my friend Kelly, who was grazed on the left shoulder, they're not going to see that. There were mental scars from people that after so many years felt like they couldn't deal with the problems that they had because of it, because of not being physically injured, and relationships and their life, they had a hard time living. They couldn't show that. But I felt like my wheelchair was going to be a really good visual to show that people were still dealing with the consequences of his actions, and that he needed to as well. And so they chose to do it on Zoom. So I'd always thought it would be in person. And so I made sure that they panned out what they could see, being entirely in my wheelchair. And this was also like, I read from a letter. Normally when I speak, I don't do that, but this was like the most important speaking engagement I would ever give. So I read what I'd written to them, and it was hard, and I was nervous, but I got through it. Then after that day, the next day was going to be his turn. And I was very surprised at what I heard. The same parole the parole board members that interviewed us also talked to him, and they asked him if he had a plan. And he said, well, I think my social worker and my mom and dad sent something. So he had no plan for himself. They asked him what kind of job that he would have. And he said, like, oh, I do trash duty here. I guess I could do something with trash when I get there, when I get home. And then they asked him, what he could do for society or give back or something. And he was just like, well, I guess if somebody dropped something, I could pick it up. You could tell that he had zero effort in, this whole thing. He said he was still hearing voices. That, as I think it was like 3 days prior was the last time he'd heard something, and that told him to jump off the stairwell where he was at or something and kill himself. But I couldn't tell whether he was trying to push himself to go to a mental institution or if he wanted to stay there for the rest of his life. And I think he wanted to stay there. I really do. And I look at it and think, that's all he's known for so many years. I think he knows what would happen if he were to leave there. He doesn't know anything but that now. And so after that day, they chose that they said they were undecided, which I was so confused about. But I think in order for them to keep him there for the rest of his life, they had to do this. So they ended up pushing it until the following Monday so that the entire parole board could make the decision together. I think that was about 7 or 8 people or something like that. But that's when they then said that they felt like he should remain there for the rest of his life. And so I think that was the best decision that they could make. And again, it's not because I was scared for myself. It was because I knew that there was too much of a potential of him doing this again. And I couldn't see any positives in letting him out. And I really honestly don't think he did either. So after that, I've not had any contact with him. I've not heard anything about him. I don't know anything that's happened since September of 2022.
And is that your choice? Do you not want to have contact with him from here on out?
Yeah, I don't think there's a reason to.
Right.
There's no reason. There was reasons why whenever when I spoke to him at the sentencing, when I spoke to him in 2007, wanting to know if he would change his mind, because I wanted to give that to other kids, that I wanted that powerful message to come from him for kids that were contemplating doing that. I think that, speaking to him at the parole board and saying why I thought he needed to stay there, there's nothing else that I have to say. We're not going to be best friends. Even though I've forgiven him, I want to move on with my life and live my life. And when I forgave him, that's what I wanted. And I think I get a choice or a chance to do that now, even though the situation, the wheelchair, the stuff that I've been experiencing because of it does remind me of why, and that it wouldn't have been like this if I hadn't had this happen to me and who did it. But I don't focus or try to dwell on that because I'm past that. I'm living my life to live my life. I want to have that full life. I mentioned before, like my twin sister, she was kind of like my motivator because she got to do the teenage stuff, and she still walks. She helps me all the time, but she kind of reminds me that I want to do that too. I want to be able to do that too. And so, I still have my boys. I want to be able to be their mom because I almost didn't get that chance. And so I'm past that, and I don't think there's a reason why I need to contact them.
Right. That's completely understandable. And I think anybody could totally understand and grasp the concept of why you don't want to.
Right.
So I know you've mentioned your book a few times, which is called I Choose to Be Happy. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that is all about and what people can expect to get out of that and where they can find it?
Sure. It's like an overview of like just everything that happened up until having my kids and getting married. It was written in 2008. It was revised in 2012, and then again in 2014. I'm hoping maybe we could do a revision of adding the parole hearing, because even though I think that would be a good update and end to the book, even though there's not really an end to my story, that would be something that I feel like that needs to be added, but it would be something I have to discuss with the publisher, and we haven't gone there yet. But it kind of shows like exactly what happened in more depth, because there is a chapter about the letters that he wrote me and what he said in them. There's a chapter about his interrogation after the shooting and what happened. There's a chapter about bullying. There's a chapter about how looking towards the positives and how it affected me and that kind of thing. It kind of goes a lot more into depth than I do whenever I'm speaking or sharing in an interview. And so that's what that book is about. And it's called I Choose to Be Happy. And it's also sold on Amazon. I have a website. It's MissyJenkins.com. You can actually order it through that as well. But Amazon has it. I also wrote a second book in 2017. It's called Lessons from a School Shooting Survivor. And so that one is more about the lessons I learned, and it's more of a teaching tool. It's still like a read that you can there's stories in it and things like that from my experiences, but from what I learned, like the very first chapter is learning people's stories. I, working as a counselor, I've met so many people or kids that others would look at and say that kid's weird, or that, that kid's
Mhm.
different, or they would have opinions about that person before they even knew what that person had been through. I think that was one thing, that creates bullying. And so learning people's story and understanding them, not that, you have to be okay with everything. Like if a kid smells, or you could tell they didn't change their clothes every day, but have that understanding that that's their story. They're going through something that you didn't have to experience. And that's why they act the way they do. And it's, and they need help, they need compassion. They don't need someone tearing them down, that kind of stuff. Empathy, learning to listen to someone, um, those kind of things that I learned throughout the time after the shooting happened. And I think that I did feel like God gave me this to give me a purpose in life. And so I feel like I've tried to use that to help others. And with my books, I kind of feel like that's what I can do in a bigger scale beyond speaking or through an interview, but to be able to share what I learned. And I feel like that's what, there's not a lot of people that know what their purpose is in life. And I'm blessed to know that. And so that's another one of the purposes, that if there's a purpose and a reason for this, then I'm going to let God help me give that. And, before I mentioned I was shy, there's no way I could get up and talk in front of a group or even an interview and not just kind of let it go. I feel like that's something that, one of the things that God has given me the ability to do, and part of my purpose. But the Lessons from a School Shooting Survivor is also on Amazon as well, and you can also get it through the website as well. But if you look up Missy Jenkins-Smith, and William Croyle is my co-author. Just put that on the Amazon, like also with the title, that should be able to help you find it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I learned about your second book last night and I was amazed to realize that you wrote another book, which
Uh,
was it was tips from a school shooting survivor or something like that. That's what it's
yeah,
called.
yeah. It's Lessons from a School Shooting Survivor, and then there's a more to the title, a long one after that. But I never thought that I would get, there would be a second book out of my story. But my co-author is an amazing writer, and he has amazing ideas, and he helped me with that. And I've thought about a third one. I've got an idea of how I would want to handle it, and that's actually through the letters that people sent me, um, from all over the world. I think that's something that we all have lost, is that communication because of social media and that kind of thing, texting and just emailing, but not like that physical. I still have all those letters, or most of them. I couldn't carry them all with me because back when, I don't even know how much I had all together, but I know the most I had in one day was 600 letters and like 45 packages sent from people. And so I couldn't keep everything, but I still have some. And I still look at that and think of how big that was and how motivating that was, and how there's actually so much good in the world. Even though we see a lot of bad, there are good people that care about others. And just, I think also when I hear people say how they get so angry and that prayers and my thoughts and prayers are with you, or aren't helpful, and you're not
Mhm.
doing anything. But that is something I needed when I felt alone and felt like everyone had forgotten me, or felt like that could happen and that I was still dealing with it and everyone was working on getting back to life. I needed people to acknowledge and say, we know you're still going through this and we're rooting for you. We know you can do it. I needed that. So when I see thoughts and prayers, that's something that can be done if anybody's going to do anything. And so I feel like, those letters mean a lot. And so just, sharing the letters that I had and the motivation from others that were given to me that would help someone in a situation, not just a school shooting situation, but, anything that's going to cause someone to feel like they're alone or they're going to give up, but there's good in the world. And so that's kind of an idea I have, but I haven't discussed it with my co-authors yet. Me and my twin sister have just discussed it so far. So, but never thought there might be a third one in my life. So,
That's awesome. That's amazing. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm sorry I've taken almost 2 hours of your time up. We could probably talk another three, four, five, 10 hours if if time allotted, you know.
Yeah, I'm a talker too. And I want to thank you though for having me because you were my counselor, giving me a chance to talk about it. Because I think that's something Michael needed was to talk about what he was going through, or he wouldn't have just simmered in himself with everything he was going through. So thank you for letting me talk about what I've gone through because that helps me mentally. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll definitely be in touch. And I hope
Okay.
next time I'm in Kentucky, we can definitely, meet in person and have
Yeah,
lunch and, you
that'd be
know,
great.
awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
That was part two of my interview with Missy Jenkins-Smith. For extra content, ad-free episodes, and more, head on over to patreon.com/unforbidden truth. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one. Unforbidden.